Hello and welcome to this Thrive Today webinar, Enjoying the Rhythms of Rest. My name is Christy Harang. I work as the administrator with Thrive Today, and I am really excited to be with you all to talk about this important topic of quieting and rest. So I was thinking about how in our culture, often we highly exalt working hard, but we don't talk a ton about rest. And right now is this interesting time where some of you might find yourselves with more to do than you've ever had. Some of you might find yourselves with more free time than you've ever had. And so now is actually a really important time to consider this concept of rest and what role it's meant to play in our lives. So we're going to be looking at this important question of, are we designed to have rhythms of rest in our life? And if so, why is that important? And how do we go about developing those rhythms of rest? And so I'm going to introduce our two presenters in just a minute who are going to be talking about this important concept with us. But first, I want to talk to you about one of our really cool resources that we have developed because we're passionate about getting resources in your hands so you can learn about the Thrive Today relational skills and you can implement them. And so Jen and Chris Corsi has developed some relational skills videos, and this is a free resource that you can find on YouTube and on Facebook. And so if you're just wanting to learn more and to get some more practical skills, this is a fabulous resource. We have over 30 videos that you can find, and if you go to either of those sites, just put Thrive Today, one word, in the search engine, and you'll see all of our videos. And I have three titles here: Press the Pause, Keys to Quiet, and Quieting Different Energy States, which will talk about the topic of quieting that we are addressing today. I also want to mention with you that we are going to have a time for Q&A at the end of our presentation. And I'll let you know how to type in your questions when we get to that point. But you might want to grab like a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper and jot down questions as we go so you don't forget them. So with that, let's introduce our amazing presenters and my dear friends. So first we have Jen Corsi, and she and her husband are the founders of Thrive Today. She is the executive director and the co-creator of the Thrive Relational Skills Training Program. She's the co-author of 30 Days of Joy. And she also is the brain power behind our blog and the main contributor to the blog we have at thrivetoday.org. Jen Corsi, so glad to have you with us.
So good to be here. Thank you, Christy.
You're welcome. And we also are blessed to be joined by Amy Brown. Amy Brown is one of our Thrive Today relational skills trainers, and she's the director of our online practice community, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later, as well as the director of our relational ambassador program with Thrive Today. And she's the co-author of Relational Skills in the Bible, which is something we will also mention a little bit later. So Amy, welcome. Glad to have you with us.
I am so glad to be here with you and Jen today. It's going to be fun.
All right, so ladies, yeah, welcome. Why don't you kind of start and introduce, and then I'll start pitching you some questions.
Amy, isn't it strange that you and I are leading a webinar on quiet and rest? Doesn't that seem a little strange to you?
It is, because, you know, we know each other pretty well, and we've both had this is a really challenging topic for both of us. We've both had major struggles in our lives around this thing of rest. So I had about 30 years of pretty severe depression, and I didn't realize during those years, but depression is actually also overactivity in the brain, focused on negative things. And so to have come to Thrive and really like immerse myself in practicing the skills, it is amazing that I would have something to share about this. And then when I was at Thrive, I remember even the very first time I heard a little bit about your story. Why don't you share a tiny bit about that?
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking about your story and how neat it is that you have something to offer. And I'm feeling also the same way, like, wow, I actually have something to offer in the area of quieting and rest, because years ago that would not have been the case. This was probably the skill I was the weakest in of all of them. I just had nothing on file about how to quiet and how to rest. In fact, I remember being in college, and the way that I would unwind was by watching a movie while grading calculus papers for the class I was a TA for. So that was like my rest, was grading calculus papers while watching a movie, because I could not tolerate my brain and the thoughts in it unless I was doing at least two things at once.
Wow.
Because it just did not know how to quiet, and I did not know how to rest. And in fact, that ended up resulting in being on disability for depression and anxiety and those kind of things. I was on federal disability about the time all my friends were graduating from college.
Wow.
And getting out of bed was a good day. So that's just how much that depression and anxiety really weighed me down. And when I was introduced to this skill, I still remember thinking, well, being still and quiet, like without a movie and without calculus papers or knitting or something else to like keep my body busy. Are you kidding? I can't do that. That's torture. That's just sitting there with my to-do list running through my head. But that's how much quiet felt foreign to me. And I'm so excited to share with people today, because it doesn't anymore. I mean, it's still the struggle. It's still the thing I can most easily fall into the habit of not quieting. But when I do, the result is actually rest and quiet, as opposed to those to-do lists cycling in my head like it was when I first started trying.
That's so good. And it's interesting because for me, like, I loved sleep, and this girl could nap, but I wasn't getting actual rest. Like my brain, I was going to sleep just so that I could shut things down. So I hope today we'll be able to introduce like these ideas of healthy disconnection rather than unhealthy disconnection. So I'm excited about it.
Me too.
Wow. Thank you guys for sharing your stories, because that, hopefully if you're watching and the idea of rest is a little foreign, or it doesn't feel like it comes naturally to you, I hope this gives you hope that you can actually develop this in your life so that it becomes more of a default mode. And yeah, I'm really inspired by both of your stories. So we look forward to hearing more. So Amy, I had mentioned earlier when I introduced that we talk a lot in our culture about working hard. We value that very highly. We don't necessarily put this high value on resting.
Yeah.
So that begs the question, should we rest? Does God want us to have rhythms of rest in our lives?
Yeah, that is such a great question and so common. So it's interesting that we forget that from the very beginning, God created these rhythms. So, we forget because we have lived with electricity for so long that we forget that day and night truly enforced rhythms of rest up until 100, 150 years ago. Because when it was night, you just couldn't do as many activities. And so God built this natural point. And of course, when God created, and when we read in the scripture, it talks about the fact that the evening was the beginning of the day. So we started the day with rest. So in the scriptures, we begin the day with rest. And as Jim Wilder says, we're up for a little bit at the beginning of the day to worship him, and then we go to sleep and God does the heavy lifting, and then we are able to rise the next morning and finish the day cooperating with him. And then of course God entered a day of rest immediately, and so God rested. And so it's interesting because, most of the time we automatically say, well, God didn't rest because he needed to. But I was in a Bible study with someone and we were talking about that. And a friend of mine said, well, he did it. I wonder if that is a way that we are like him, that we need a rhythm of rest. It is not saying that that is a weakness. So that was like really eye-opening for me. So, so that is creation. But then there are also some scriptures that I love about rest. So Isaiah 30:15, and it's interesting because this includes both rest and our common response to the idea of rest. So it says, "For thus said the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. But you were unwilling, and you said, no, we will flee upon horses. Therefore you shall flee away. And we will ride upon swift steeds. Therefore your pursuers shall be swift." So yeah, we were created for rest, and God wants us to rest, but he does give us the freedom to refuse that. And so that is a pretty good picture of the fact that he wants us to rest. And then the other one that is my favorite is Zephaniah 3:17. So it says, "The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save." And some of those translations say warrior who will save. "He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exult over you with loud singing." So even, God wants to give us rest. And so that is incredible and beautiful. And so why is this true? Why does he create us with this need for a rhythm of rest? And so sometimes people, when we're talking about brain science, because that is part of what we talk about, there's a little resistance to that because of, this is science. We want to be Christians who follow the scripture. But, science is just now discovering things that make the scriptures come clear to us. Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. So yes, why did he create day and night? Because our brains are designed to run in rhythms that alternate. So we have found that our brains all need to alternate joy and rest. So joy is that sense of, I'm glad to be with you, you're glad to be with me. It's high energy, and yet it needs to be followed by rest, by some quiet. And so that doesn't mean a nap, even though Amy is the nap queen. And we'll talk more about what does that look like. It's interesting, and doing some research, I found that our brains use 20% of the energy that our bodies create. Our brains are very demanding. They need a lot of energy. And so we need to give ourselves a rest, so that, because our brains are actually just very, very demanding. We can only produce so much energy in a day. And so, so that is one of the things that is important about why we should rest. But another thing that is really fascinating is that over the last, say, 10 years, they've discovered that we have a default mode that our brain can fall into, and it's a very peaceful mode. It's that kind of synchronization that we talk about at Thrive. And so it's this resting state. And so what they have found through the research that I thought was so incredible is that here are the things that our brain is doing during this downtime. So listen to this. Our brain is consolidating our identity. Our brain is helping us understand the behavior of others. Our brain is actually putting together our moral and ethical, framework during this downtime. And also our brain has to synthesize our recent learning. So if we don't have downtime, then the things that we learn, we lose. And so some of us, I know I can remember pulling all-nighters in college. and then going and just pouring out all of this knowledge I had gained overnight by just cramming it in. And then a day or two later, I would be thinking about that test, and I would think, I don't know any of that. And that was because there was not adequate rest. So these are like just incredibly important things that are happening in rest. And so as I was reading about that, I was thinking, identity, understanding behavior, morals. No wonder we are so cranky when we have not rested. The parts of our brain that are doing the important work to keep us connected with each other and with God are just not getting, their time to operate, to kind of get it all together. So I thought that was fascinating, and it's a really good argument for, yes, we should rest, and God intends us to rest.
Wow. One thing you said, Amy, that actually really struck me was when your friend was talking about, and I'm going to butcher it probably, but
that's okay.
What if it's not a weakness?
Yeah.
Because I think that's it. We view it's like a strength to work hard. It's a weakness to rest. God doesn't need to rest because he's not weak. But what if, like what I hear you saying is that rest plays an important role in our brains processing information and our identity and all these things. And so it shifts the way we look at rest, because why would we want to rest if it's just something that weak people do?
Right. It is a function that keeps our body and mind operating at optimum. So, we are very careful a lot of times about what we eat and what we do with our bodies to keep it functioning well. We exercise and we do these other things. And so, I don't look at my heart and say, wow, you are weak because you beat and then you stop and you beat and you go, you go back and forth. Or, looking at it at anything else, oh, my digestive system is, wow, it has to have a liver to clean things out of it. Why can't it just function with? No, and this is just part of who we are. It's part of how we are created in God's image. We can embrace it because this is a way that we are like him.
Yeah. So it sounds like learning how to rest starts with shifting the way we think about it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I noticed that for myself, even when I started trying to rest initially, I still had to talk myself into it. Like, okay, well, I'll just get this list of to-dos done and then I can rest, and it took, and it still takes a lot of convincing myself that no, okay, pausing in the middle or even before I start my to-dos helps me have the focus and creativity to get them done, and not just better, but more peacefully. Like there's a difference between when I just push through. Usually I fall out of relational mode, which isn't even what we're focusing on today, but I'll fall out of relational mode. I'll lose my joy to do whatever it is I'm trying to do, even if it's interacting with my kids. If I'm just trying to push through, then I turn into, taskmaster, and I lose all the joy in whatever I'm trying to do, versus when I pause and rest and refresh first or in the middle, then I can do out of what I have instead of just doing it out of what I don't have and pushing myself until I resent it.
That's so good, Jen. Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's how our brain is designed to work.
Yeah. And I was introduced to this concept of working from a place of rest several years back. And that's what I hear you describing is you hit a place of rest, then you can work from a place of rest. Your work is more peaceful. Your work is more productive, right?
Yeah.
So we've mentioned two concepts. We've mentioned rest, and we've also mentioned the word quieting. I think we're all kind of familiar with the idea of rest. right? But this concept of quieting, I mean, is that we just get in a room that's all quiet and we quiet? Jen, talk to us more about that. What is quieting and how does it help us?
So quieting really is the on-demand release of serotonin in our brains. That's what we're talking about here. And so that's a fancy way of saying taking a momentary pause in our interactions, taking a moment to be still, taking a deep breath. I remember when my kids were especially little and it was just like World War III to get everybody in the car to get somewhere. And by the time we got in the car, we were always running late for wherever we were going. But I still usually would remember to just stop. I wouldn't even turn the keys in the car. I would just take like 2 or 3 deep breaths before and just kind of reset. Before I turned the keys, and it made me, 10 seconds later to wherever we were going. But then it helped kind of pause the hurriedness and pause the stress and chaos of the moment and just kind of ground myself for a moment. And so taking that momentary pause, it can build trust in our interactions, because when we pause, when we notice other people need a pause, that can build trust in our interactions. It gives us space to think before we respond. It keeps interaction safe to have that little quiet, and that goes into a little bit even more of an in-depth skill of interactive quieting too, which is like paying attention and trying to keep things in a good level of energy, because really, whether it's joy or upset, it needs to be regulated. It needs to have rhythms. We can even have too much joy. I remember times when I've been exhausted by joy because I wasn't quieting from it. I remember the night Chris proposed. That night I could not sleep. I was so excited. I talked my roommate's ear off until she needed to sleep. And then I still was not able to quiet down and calm down because I was just so excited. And I really needed to quiet. I mean, it was an exciting moment, of course, but it was showing my lack of strength in that area still at that point of being able to quiet even from joyful things, because it's important to be able to quiet ourselves from both joyful and upsetting interactions. In fact, that's one of the reasons why depression has to do with quieting, is often we're not able to quiet. We're not just not able to quiet the good things, but we're not able to quiet the unsettled feelings, the hopeless feelings, the anger or the fear or the anxiety feelings. And because we're unable to find a place of peace and quiet in that, our brains just get overtired, overtaxed, overworked, and we can get into that place of depression, of feeling like there's no way of getting out of that. So, and it's important both to have quiet alone and then quiet with other people. Now, if you don't know, if this is as new to you as it was to me when I was first introduced to the concept of quiet and the thought of quiet, or you try it and it's like, well, why did I try that? That was just torment. I just sat and had all my to-do lists go through my head, and I was intentionally not doing any of the things that would get me closer to feeling settled. That's how I used to feel all the time. So if that's the case for you, that means you probably do not have this skill on file. It's not just I need to get better at this. It's it's not there. And so that's when really you need to be around somebody who has the skill of quiet, who does know how to quiet, and you can just be with them while they're quieting and focus on taking deep breaths and focus on, sometimes your brain gets so busy when you're trying to quiet. You need something to focus on to be able to help, so that you're not focusing on all the thoughts coming in your head. So it might be your breathing, or it might be something that God wants to tell you. But the point being, if you don't have this skill on file, you're going to need to quiet with somebody who has the skill to help you learn it. Then you can start quieting on your own, but it's also just restorative to quiet with other people. Sometimes at the end of the day, especially in this season where our kids are home 24/7, they're not at school, there is no break, there are no babysitters, there's no interaction with grandma, there's no our support system is temporarily missing. We, Chris and I get to the end of the day, and while we would love to be glad to be together, we just like crash on the couch. Like we enjoy being together in rest because that's all we have the energy for at that point. So it can build your relationships to rest together too.
No, and that's really good. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say, and with our kids, it can help too, because then with our kids, as we quiet with them, we're teaching them that skill, and we're also building our bond through quiet with them as well. And so it has so many implications when we can quiet for ourselves, but then we can also quiet with our spouse, quiet with our kids, teaching them that skill, but even just experiencing that sweet moment of just being still and quiet together with our little, isn't that as moms like one of our favorite things when our kids just want to cuddle? Mm-hmm. Like when they just want to snuggle and we just get to be quiet with them, that shows that importance in the bond of just being still and quiet.
That's really good. And I know we're going to get more to the practicals of how we kind of do that later, but would you say for people where it feels clunky or awkward that's okay?
Oh yeah. Yep.
It's like, this is kind of weird. Like we're not talking.
That's a great clarification. Yes. So our society is not used to quiet. And our society is not used to just, they call it the awkward pause, right? Because nobody's talking. So it feels awkward because we're used to people constantly talking. And so if we're not used to this, it is going to feel awkward. It's going to feel clunky. In fact, it might, like I said, if it's not something you even have on file, it may feel the opposite of quiet. It might stir you up and make you anxious as you're trying to quiet. But that's a sign how much you need it and how worth it will be as you do that intentional practice to get more comfortable with it. Because where I started, was miserable. It was miserable to be me. It was miserable to be around me. I didn't know how to quiet. I didn't know how to let other people stop. I didn't know how to let an awkward pause go in a conversation. But now, I'm not saying I do it perfectly. This was one of my biggest weaknesses. So it's still my tendency. And in these times especially, I noticed that it's easy for me to forget to be intentional about quiet. Because it's not part of a natural rhythm for me to be, I have to be intentional about it still. Yeah. When I do, the refreshment that comes, and the peacefulness that comes and the enjoyment. I feel like I can enjoy life so much more when I come at it from a place of quiet and rest.
Yeah. So if we were in your living room together right now, Jen, because we're having so much fun discussing this would actually, like right this moment, guys, this would be a good time for us to let's just take a deep breath and kind of demonstrate about 15, 20 seconds. Yeah, so I invite the people listening to notice how that feels after, we're having so much fun here. We're passing on this good information. But now we can take a breath. So the enjoyment continues.
It feels more like a peaceful enjoyment than a frenzied enjoyment.
Yeah, that is so good.
Well, Amy, thank you for that. That's so good. Mm-hmm. I love it. So Amy, let's shift. We've talked a lot about quieting. And so, let's shift this concept of rest and, talking about what is it really? Because a lot of times I think we do things that feel restful, but we don't actually come out of that time rested, rejuvenated. Yeah. So what actually is resting, and how do we, talk to us about that?
Yeah. So, In resting, there are a number of components that can come into play, but mainly we're stepping away from the activity that has things moving rapidly in our mind or body, and we quiet our mind and our body. And so, as I was mentioning, those skills that are and functions that are in our brain that come online during our downtime, this resting that we take actually increases our ability to stay connected relationally with both God and with people. So to rest means that we're just slowing things down. And so I'll give you a few examples here in a minute, but resting actually increases, as Jen mentioned, our productivity and our creativity. So rest does not have to be a complete ceasing of activity. I had a friend, wow, it was 30 years ago, and we would walk our children who were in kindergarten to school together. And this friend, when I first met her, made me crazy because she walked very slowly. She was just meandering. She was moseying. And I am a high energy person and I move rapidly. And I noticed that if I would synchronize to the speed that she was moving, that our walk down to the school to drop the kindergartners off was so much more enjoyable. So we were moving, we were talking to each other, we were still, some interactions with the children, but we just like lowered everything. And we found that it was just it was just a lot more enjoyable, and getting the kids off and into the classroom and everything was a more peaceful thing. So that's kind of an example of what you might call rest on the move. And I found, after I had been friends with her, that when we were in those rushes, and I particularly thank Jen with you of trying to get everybody out to the car, and all, with everything that is needed and everything, but I learned to actually slow down as we were doing all these activities. So I might stop and I'm putting things in the book bag or something, and I just actually picked up the book more slowly and put them in and took the time, if I needed to allow the books to get, in their spots and not just be cramming papers in and grabbing lunches and so forth. So that would in turn would calm my children. So they might be trying to, jam their foot into their shoes, and all of a sudden, they would notice, oh, okay, we're moving more slowly. And that was really helpful. So there are some other things that our brain can be doing something that is actually engaging, but it allows rest. So things like listening to music, doing puzzles, things like that, where you're not fully engaged, walking, I mentioned, those are things that can give us momentary pauses, the quicker pauses. Even, it's interesting that even when we blink, our brains use that opportunity to do just a little bit of synchronizing of, we think of a game of Tetris. And so we have all these thoughts that are coming down and they all need to fit in somewhere. And so even as we blink, so if we would take a moment to just close our eyes frequently and take a breath, that helps us rest. But our memory actually depends on sleep. So this is why Jen has mentioned COVID brain, and I know a lot of people talk about pregnancy brain or newborn brain, and there is a reason. And so, all of the uncertainty that surrounds us right now is causing our brains to work. They're overactive because with the uncertainty, we don't have a solution. And so we can accept that. We can teach ourselves to accept the fact that, okay, I'm not going to have a solution, but we really need to allow ourselves to sleep because our brain is working on those things while we are sleeping, and it is reinforcing what we've learned during the day. So, we don't think of ourselves as learning a lot of the times, but we're taking in all the information that's coming our way.
Can I make a funny comment on that, Amy?
Yes.
So I remember I was in high school, and my high school youth group leader had this puzzle on his desk. It was one of those like physical puzzles that you have to try to get the ring off of. And
Yeah.
I messed with it for 20, 30 minutes in his office. And then that night, in the middle of the night, I woke up and knew that I knew how to do it. And the next morning, I can't remember now how I did it, but I went to his office again and I just did it. And I figured it out in my sleep. Like I didn't,
Yes.
I wasn't even thinking about it anymore. Just the lack of thinking about it allowed me to figure it out in my sleep.
Yes. Yes. Perfect example.
That's so cool. I think how many of us, we find that too. You're working on something and you're hitting a wall, and then you just take and I know sometimes I don't want to take a break. I want to push through till I get this figured out. But then you take a break and you come back to it, and all of a sudden you can move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. So in reading through, I saw that Hemingway said to stop writing when you knew what was going to happen next. So what he was saying, so they were saying that there is a validity to actually stopping before you get to a full stopping point. And that they quoted him, that our brain can work towards the rest of the solution. So if we, stop before we finish a task and we're kind of, okay, I'm ready, I know what I need to do next, but we give ourselves some rest, then when we come back, we're actually more productive, efficient, and creative in the way that we engage. And the other thing I wanted to mention by way of example is Einstein. So Einstein, when he was grappling with these huge concepts that would change the world forever, when he got stuck, he would go and play his violin. He was a really good violinist. And so music actually helps the two sides of our brain synchronize, and particularly if we are actively involved. So he would come back frequently, while he was playing the music. He wasn't thinking about the problem, but when he came back, he was better able. So yeah, it's just our memory and our synchronizing all the different facts that are coming into our world and our relational interactions and everything. It depends on rest. So yes, you can be still busy and resting with the things like walking or doing puzzles or something like that, but it's actually sleep, like really truly resting. Yes, napping can be good, and they have found that if you can rest and then doze for about 10 minutes, that can be optimal, because you don't go into enough sleep that you have to fight to come out of it. So those of you who resist the idea of naps, you can at least give yourself permission to rest and then sleep for 10 minutes, and that will be helpful. So
I want to add one more example there. When I had a colicky newborn with our first, and he would, I couldn't necessarily nap when he napped like everybody told me to, because he didn't sleep very long. I remember that even if I just laid still and quieted my mind and was able to be still even for 10 minutes, I felt almost as refreshed as if I had slept. just because being still and quieting my thoughts, and nobody needing anything from me for 10 minutes,
Yes.
felt so refreshing that I didn't even necessarily have to
Yes.
sleep.
Yeah, I can totally relate because I had twins and they were colicky.
Oh,
So yeah.
I don't know how you did that.
Well, with all this, like, I think it's highlighting the point, rest is not just a nicety or some luxury, it's actually a necessity.
Yeah.
It's a necessity. And so let's switch gears and start talking about how do we develop this, especially if it's something that, you know, Jen, you said you just may not even have this on file at all. So how do we begin to learn this?
No, that's a great question.
Yeah, Jen, why don't you start? Or yeah, jump in on this.
Sure. You know, so learning to quiet is hard. If you have, now the good news is probably most people aren't quite as without that skill as I was. So probably the majority of you on this webinar who are listening to this have at least some little bit of skill in this area. And so what that means is you have something to work with, you have something to develop, you have something that with practice you can get good at it. It still might feel awkward. It still might take a while before it feels restful. I know that it took a while for me to just like take 2 deep breaths and feel my body calm down. Like that's advanced resting. That's you've practiced enough that you can just like really your brain, because it is literally in your brain an on-demand release of serotonin. And so you have to train that part of your brain to release serotonin, so that when you need it, it can be there. And so for the majority of people who have something on file, you know, this is a developing of that skill. So now for people who have nothing on file, like I said, that's a lot harder. You really probably do need somebody else with you. And I saw somebody else's question earlier on the chat that, you know, we're all on lockdown or stay-at-home orders or those kind of things. Many of us are. So how do you quiet with some, you know, if you don't have anybody in your home, and so therefore you don't have somebody that can quiet with you, what do you do? In truth, it does make it a lot harder. Jesus can be with you in that, and that's, you know, learning about that Emmanuel interaction, which we have some videos on that, some online practice communities on that, and some webinars on that. So I'm not going to go much into that here because there's a whole lot of other resources where you can learn more about that. But Jesus can quiet with you. Yes, Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, can I jump in? Somebody mentioned that not everyone has access to Zoom, and I would actually say many of us, because of our we have so much technology, we forget the simpler technologies that we still have. So probably telephone calls are actually much better for quieting with another person than Zoom, because Zoom actually really works our brains. We're not quieting well because we're trying to synchronize eye contact and so forth, and it's impossible. So I just want to throw that out there that, if you're not allowed to be with someone, call someone and say, hey, I would, just talk to them. And after you've talked for a few minutes, say, I would love to just sit and take a few deep breaths and be quiet and know that somebody else is here with me. Would you like to do that? So I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah. Another thing is sometimes our pets are good at quieting with us. Cats tend to be better than dogs, but some dogs are also snuggly and quiet, or at least after they've played their hearts out, then they can be quiet with us. And so even just another being with us who can be quiet and still can really help us with learning that skill. When we're at the point of trying to find ways to insert quiet into our day, quiet moments at the dinner table, quiet when we're taking a walk, other kinds of appropriate times, taking a minute to see what we notice. With my kids, we stopped doing timeouts when they were really like 2 years old or 3 years old, and we replaced them with what we call quiet practice. And so they were sent to, once they had started to learn this skill, they were sent to a chair or something in the room with us where their goal was to calm themselves down by taking deep breaths. And so their goal was to focus on trying to be still in their body and in their mind by focusing on deep breaths. And so it could be because they just disobeyed. It could be because they just hit their brother. It could be because they were getting too hyper and out of control. It could be because they threw something at the table. Whatever it was, quiet always seemed to be a helpful element. And if they were really upset and I knew that they just couldn't quiet by themselves, especially when they were littler, then I would say, would you rather quiet by yourself or do you want to quiet with me? And so then I would hold them on my lap and I would help them calm down, especially if they're having a really big tantrum, so long as they weren't hitting me. But we would quiet together. And so that's a really precious thing we can do with our kids. It also teaches them quiet is needed in these kind of situations. And it wasn't necessarily as a punishment, but it was just, let's take a break from this interaction that's not going well. Let's quiet and still ourselves a little bit. And that made a big difference in our family. And it's still something we use, and they're 8 and 10 now. And so it's a lot quicker now. And in fact, now we've added that you have to, find your way back to relational mode before you get up. Often it's an attitude or a grumpiness or something like that is accompanying the need for quiet.
Yeah, that's good. And I think even I've noticed just starting to be aware that I need to quiet, just that is helpful. Yeah. Doing the dishes in a frenzied state, noticing, like, oh, I need to quiet a little bit. Just the awareness is a really great first step. And Marcia was also mentioning, and I love this app. The Pause app is really great. John Eldridge has put out the Pause. It's a 1-minute pause, and there's a 1-minute pause, a 3-minute pause, a 5-minute pause, and a 10-minute pause, so you can pick your length. But that's beautiful because it gives you an example too. If you don't have someone who's with you, it gives you an example to follow. He leads you through the time. And if you're restless through it, okay, keep doing it. And you'll eventually, it'll become more natural. So I want we're going to transition to Q&A in a minute. And I know some of you have already put in some questions. So we'll try to make notes and get back to those. But I want to share with you I should say this. So if you're not sure how to enter in your questions, there's a little tab on your Zoom screen that says Q&A. So you can just click on that and enter your questions in there. And while you guys are thinking of your questions and entering in questions, I just want to mention a few of our resources for you if you want to continue to learn more about what we're talking about. First of all, let me mention that we're recording this webinar. We always record them. And so you can take the link you use to register. And if you're finding this helpful, please spread the word to your friends and send them that registration link and they can get the recording. And you can email that, text it, put it on social media. I have already mentioned the skill videos. That's a great way just to get your feet wet and learning more about the relational skills and how to quiet or these different skills we talk about. Another great resource if you're wanting to get your feet wet is Transforming Fellowship. This was written by Jen's husband, Chris. It's great because it goes through the 19 skills and it talks about what they are and why they matter and how you can develop those skills in your life, how you can learn them and some practicals for doing that. I just highly recommend that. And I mentioned that Amy co-wrote the book with Chris, The Relational Skills in the Bible. This is great if you want to dig a little deeper. It's going to give you some Bible study on characters and stories so you can learn about the relational skills from biblical examples. And also it's going to have so many practical exercises for developing the skills in your life. You can find those both on our website, thrivetoday.org. And if you click on resources and click on the book link, it'll lead you to those. Or you can go directly to the site right here mentioned. And then I'm so excited that Amy Brown has developed our online practice community. Once a month, she gathers people for a 3-hour interactive training where she does teaching. She has times for practical implementation of exercises so you can practice it on the spot, and there's Q&A. So she's going to be diving deeper into the topic of rest this May 16th from 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. If you can't make it live, you can still register and get the recording and the handouts and all the resources that come with that. So you go to thrivetoday.org and click on our resources tab and then select online practice community. And when you get to that tab, I want to mention that we also have a library of all the past online practice communities that she's done, and they're all on sale for $10 right now. So this is a really great way to just dive deeper and to learn about these skills, to practice these skills. And the reality is we're always going to need to practice them. Like, I don't think we're going to hit a point where like, oh, I'm good. I've got this all figured out. I don't need to practice it anymore. You know,
I've been doing this for 20 plus years and I still need to practice. Yes. Or 20. Yeah.
So I think no matter where we're at, this is just a beautiful resource that all of us could take advantage of. So with that, let's go to our Q&A. And I want to mention one that came in earlier. Someone had mentioned struggling with PTSD and that making it particularly difficult to quiet. Do you guys have any recommendations?
Yeah, so the practice is just so important, and there's a practice, excuse me, there's a practice that has been used with children who have severe attachment problems, and it's called strong sitting. And so you might want to try that, and you start with just with children, you can start with like 15 seconds. So you can see what is the lowest amount that you can do calmly. So strong sitting simply means that you sit, ideally sit cross-legged facing the wall. And if you need to use a chair, you do that, but sit facing a blank wall. And if you need to put a Post-it note on the wall with a word like peace or Jesus, you can do that, but you just breathe deeply and don't focus on anything other than your Post-it or your wall, and gradually increase the amount of time that you do that. And so that is a practice that can help you develop the ability to quiet, because you're giving yourself that blank wall to focus on, so that can be helpful. And many of the other exercises that are available, like in the relational skills in the Bible, or Thrive Prep and so forth. Go ahead, Jim.
I would add that with PTSD, there's trauma there, and there might even be trauma around quieting. And so that's where bringing Emmanuel in and finding his healing is going to be a big part of it. And even having him help you with that quieting and the pain that quiet, because sometimes the PTSD might be that somebody left us or an abandonment kind of a thing. So there might be like that quiet feels traumatic for that reason. And so that's where, again, we won't go a lot into how you do that here, because there's a whole lot of other resources that you can find that in. But I think when you have PTSD, that there's some healing needed as well, and some of Jesus's peace in those places, so that that isn't brought into those moments when you're trying to quiet.
And that would probably answer another question that came in that was similar. What do you do if you feel anxiety when you quiet because connecting to your body is fearful? Would you say more of the same, Jen?
Yeah, I think in those moments, again, bringing Jesus into it to help him, to have him help you heal some of those painful places that get brought into trying to quiet would be really helpful. As well as, doing it very, very small moments of it, like you're not aiming for 3 minutes of quiet at that point. You're aiming for like 5 or 10 seconds of quiet. And having something to focus on, like your breathing, even if it's not your whole body, but just like, okay, did my belly go out? Did I take a belly breath when I breathed? That kind of a thing.
Yeah. Awesome. We have a question here. Charlotte Mason, the founder of Ambleside Schools, once said, "A change is as good as a rest." I'm curious about how to integrate that with these concepts. What do you brilliant women think? We're brilliant.
Isn't that fun? A change is as good as a rest. I'm not actually sure what that means. So maybe
I'm
just like a
wondering,
change of scenery is as good as a rest.
change in
Sometimes a
activity.
shift, like a shift is almost a reset, I wonder if it
Mhm.
even related to that.
Yeah, yeah. So some of the examples that were, doing other things, even though it's not sleeping or, because I would be interested if she meant rest as in sleep or if she was, what she was referring to. But yeah, I would think a shift in focus can be helpful.
Yeah, I think it goes into that rhythms because we have,
Mm-hmm.
our desire is to have rhythms of joy and rest, or even work and play, and those kind of things. And so, in that sense, if that's the type of change she's referring to, that change, that staying in our rhythm and finding a rhythm from something is a big difference. It gives our brain a rest. It gives our brain an opportunity to shift out of high energy to low energy or that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's good. Lots of comments are coming in on this, but I want to keep going to our questions. This is a great one. What kind of people are we looking for when we want to learn to quiet? It's hard to explain. I want to learn to quiet. Can we just sit? Like, how do we know who quiets well?
I think you would identify it as somebody who kind of seems peaceful with themselves, who just, they walk into a room and it just kind of adds a more peaceful presence to the room.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And if you feel peaceful around them, right? Just being around them makes you feel more.
Well, yes and no, because there's also a chance that their peacefulness pushes your buttons because you're, so there is chance that the person that would be helpful to you pushes your buttons because they're the opposite of you. So, but yes, overall, ideally, somebody who would make you feel peaceful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about social media? Can you comment on how that is not restful and how to have a healthy relationship to media and tips for people who tend to use media as false quieting?
Well, those are big questions.
That's a webinar.
Yeah. Just briefly, you're right. Screens don't really help us quiet. In fact, screens before bed can disrupt our sleep, can cause us to have a harder time falling asleep. So screens, TV can be something that lets us veg. There are nights when we're just so fried that just vegging feels good, but we're not actually more rested at the end of it. I don't feel more peaceful at the end of it. I just feel like I didn't do anything with my time, and that was what I needed in that moment. But screens, social media, those kind of things don't really help us find peace and quiet. And in fact, screens, if it has to do with social media, news, politics, any of those things right now, probably are causing the opposite effect because there's just a lot that is distressing in the world right now. So if that is what we're looking at, we're definitely causing the opposite of quiet in our bodies.
Yeah, I would add, because generally, if we truly recognize the value of rest, we probably are trying to limit our screen time. So it would probably be more helpful to just introduce quiet with the person who is using the screen to artificially quiet than to try to talk to them about it. Because so I think just introducing quieting into your relationships is a good way to help people see the differences.
No, that's really good. And it seems like, she asked about having a healthy relationship with media. It seems like just using wisdom and moderation is really helpful. It's kind of harder with ourselves sometimes, but with our kids, we set boundaries. Like, if you want to have a little bit of time in media, you need to have some outdoor time, and, just keeping boundaries on it so that it doesn't become all consuming, which it easily can.
Yeah. And paying attention to our bodies and our emotions. So, you know, sometimes I find myself reading a thread and then I go, I don't need to do this. This is not, I'm not feeling that, you know, peaceful at all or joyful. So I'll just turn it off. Yeah.
I have one last question here. And Jen, I feel like one of your videos, the one on quieting different energy states, could help on this one. But
Sure.
Tips for quieting higher energy level people.
Yeah, no, I agree. That video is exactly what I would suggest. But essentially, higher energy level people, they might need to do some physical activity before they try to physically be still and quiet to get some of the energy out of their body that is in their brain. And then they might feel more peaceful at the end of a run or something like that, but that isn't actually the quiet. The quiet isn't like towards the end of the run while you're still running. The quiet is what comes when your body and your mind can be at peace and at rest after the run or after the high energy activity.
Wonderful. Well, we are right at the hour, and I just want to thank you, Amy and Jen, for sharing your wisdom with us, and thank you to all of you who have joined us today. We mentioned some resources, and so you're going to get an email tomorrow with a recording to this webinar, as well as the resources that we mentioned. And if you have any pressing questions that didn't get answered, please feel free to email us at info@thrivetoday.org, and we'd be happy to respond to that. And any last words you want to say before we take off, ladies?
I hope you have a restful afternoon.
Yes, take a moment to take some deep breaths when we're finished here. It's been a lot of fun and information.
Yeah, I love that advice. I do recommend that when you shut off and leave the webinar, I encourage you just to stay for a minute and just take those deep breaths and close your eyes and take a minute to pause before you move to the next activity, which is a great thing to do in general. Before you switch gears to another activity, just take a moment and pause between. And I hope that this is encouraging to you. And again, pass the word to your friends, and we look forward to seeing you next time. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.